supply chains to admire. Now, many times people are like, well, Laura, how do you know they're the best supply chains? I don't. But it's a start. I'm just trying to help people define supply chain excellence. Because in my role, everybody sends me their supply chain strategy documents, and they say, we want to drive supply chain excellence. And I say, what does that mean? And they can't answer me, right? And I'm like, we must define supply chain excellence for employees to drive alignments. We get all these crazy RFPs for technologies in the market, which drives the market crazy. We're not clear what excellence is, and because we're not clear with excellence, we send the market into circular motion, right? One of the most important things we've got to do as supply chain leaders is define what is excellence. Now, some people say, well, Laura, your methodology is flawed because it doesn't have customer service in it. And I would agree with that, and I wish there was a good way for me to get customer service data. But there is no good source of order data, customer service data to be able to look at that. So when you implement a balanced scorecard in your company, I'd like you to consider the one I use in the supply chains to admire of growth, operating margin, inventory turns, not cash to cash, because I don't want you to fool yourself with a compound metric. Return on invested capital, you can also look at return on assets or whatever you want to do, but are you using your assets correctly? And add customer service on time, in full, to give you the balance. And of course, you're going to have to add safety, and you might want to add something around human capital. But I would love to see people move from functional metrics to a balanced scorecard. What I see in the research is people that focus on functional cost, lowest manufacturing cost, lowest transportation cost, throw the supply chain out of balance and actually have higher cost. What I see is people that focus on total cost throw the supply chain out of balance because they're not focused on margin. People that focus on cash to cash miss the opportunity on inventory strategy. Most people don't understand cash to cash versus orders, inventory. And so one of the things I really want you to leave with is we must clearly define supply chain excellence. And we must clearly define supply chains based upon rhythms and cycles. Most people have 5 to 7 supply chains. The efficient supply chain is the supply chain that does not have a lot of demand variability or supply variability, and that can be a tightly integrated supply chain without a lot of push-pull decoupling points, and you can outsource that supply chain and you can put inventory on boats. But if you've got a responsive supply chain, which is all about time, that you got to get a product to market quickly, bathing suits, flu vaccine, drugs, those are responsive supply chains. That's all about time. That needs to be locally sourced, use the same metrics but different set points. And if you've got an agile supply chain which has high demand and supply variability, that really needs to be designed for inventory strategies, bidirectional orchestration we're going to talk about later today, and making sure that we're really good at outside-in planning. So with that, the supply chains to admire. 4% of companies. The companies that have made year-over-year progress to the highest degree are Apple, L'Oreal, Sleep Number, and a new player is Toro. I want to talk about Toro. Consumer durables, this is the sector. This is Toro's orbit charts. Toro has outperformed this sector. So when we think about orbit charts, we're actually plotting the pattern of the performance year over year. And these are all on my website and they're on SlideShare, but what I want to do is validate that these are truly outperforming supply chains. So let me introduce my first speaker, Kevin Carpenter. I published the Supply Chains to Admire, and ping, I got a message on LinkedIn. I loved it. He's like, I want to talk about supply chains to admire. And I'm like, I do too, right? And Kevin joined the Toro company, and he previously worked at Carrier Global, and he worked at Rockwell Automation, and he has led that company to supply chains to admire. Let's welcome him to the stage. Welcome up, Kevin. So this is your clicker. Okay. Yeah, you got the power in your hand now.
Thank you so much.
Go green and you'll go forward.
All right. Thank you, guys. She's hard to follow because she talks all about the technical stuff about supply chain, and I'm about to talk about how you transform and perform. I'm going to ask you some questions first. How many people work in supply chain? How many people work in an integrated supply chain? How many people have ever worked in plants, manufacturing plants? How many folks have been manufacturing engineers, sourcing professionals, buyer planners, logistics leaders, manufacture things on a floor, put boxes in trucks? How many thank yous have you had over your career? Because honestly, we do the things that no one really knows, but every dime that every company can transact on has our touches on it. How many times have you complained about demand sensing? How many times have we looked at our forecast and we've seen high fives? And I was in the business unit at one point in time, but how many times have we seen high fives from the business units by overspanking the forecast by 50% and saying, you ops guys and gals can't do anything? You know, when I was on a plane, I didn't know what I was going to talk about. I'd prepared a presentation. And I'm going to go through it. I am going to go through it. But these are the types of things as we start thinking about supply chains of 2030, we have to lean into. Because believe it or not, in the supply chain, the end-to-end supply chain, it usually composes 80% of the people. 80% of the people. Think about that. 80% of the people that don't get thanked. The 20% that are running around, oh, we did it, we saved the quarter. While we're having bull whip effect, and I got my people working overtime the last 2 weeks of the quarter. Every quarter. So if we don't lean into that, we're going to have more of an issue than we have now. What's the key reason why we don't have capacity? Any takers? Give me a couple of yells. What are the key reasons? Capacity is made up of three things: people, capable process, and material. What's probably the key reason why? Come on, Ed, you sit with me all the time. Labor. Variability. Any more? Any takers? It's labor. Think about it. Everything in capacity, materials, you got to have somebody build it. Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4. If we don't start leaning into how we thank our people, how we engage our people, we're going to continue having this cycle. So that's why I asked all those questions initially, because the basis of what we did at the Toro Company is we started leaning into, in my organization, 3 priorities. And you'll see this in the fabric of them. I kind of sized them up in business type messages, but it's how do I keep my people safe? An old operations term called throughput, that's a catch-all. And cultural transformation. How do we build that oneness? How do we engage our employee? How do we make sure that they know they matter. You can't transform a company without starting with the culture. I'm saying it again. You can't transform a company without starting with the culture. I can't talk about all the mathematics, all the advanced statistics. I can't talk about the bullwhip effect. I can't talk about throughput. I can't talk about takt times, processing times. I can't talk about material flow. I can't talk about lean transformation. I can't talk about anything if I don't start with the culture first. So if we don't really lean into that piece, we won't have to worry about supply chain 2030. But if we don't, we won't have any commodities to wear, to drive. It'll be chaos, honestly. It'll be a battle for who can get what. Which, what does that do? That drives what we're living now, inflation. How formal are we, Laura? Can people just ask me questions off?
The 30 minutes is yours.
30 minutes is mine. I got like 24, 25. Now, this is what I'll go through, and I'll briefly talk about the Toro company. I'll talk about the integrated supply chain. I'll talk about our driving forces, people, profitable growth, and productivity. But the three ingredients will come back to safety, throughput, cultural transformation. And then I'll close. And then I'll end with a safety moment instead of beginning with a safety moment. Toro Company, 11,000 employees. 8,031 work in the integrated supply chain. 125 plus products sold. It's about a $4.5 billion company now. That was 2020. 200 plus distributors worldwide. That's really one of our competitive advantages, our distribution channel. We make all of these brands. So if you think about it, we have residential, commercial, we have construction, underground construction with Ditch Witch, American Augers, and we have commercial golf grounds. And because we are in most golf courses, whether it's water, irrigation, or golf products that actually mow the actual greens, fairways, and roughs. I'm not going to read the guiding principles, but I'm going to tell you Toro is a company that's built off legacy and tradition. So imagine trying to transform a company that is built off legacy, tradition. So leaning into that and convincing that we can go, you said good to great. There's nothing wrong with being great or even greater. Or as I told them, from good to gooder. I think I said that. I know that's not a word, but that's what I said in a meeting. And you should see how when you do that, everyone feels they're being insulted. And you have to really tread lightly to say, no, I'm not insulting you, but we're trying to transform our company to be ready for 2030. Comes down to our sustainability pillars, which is product excellence. Anybody who has a Toro? Anybody have a Toro? Yeah, look at that. Oh, okay. I'm not going to ask what else you got. I'm not going to ask about John Deere or anything like that. It comes down to product excellence. We pride ourselves in putting the best product out there. People, 11,000 people, 8,031 is in our plants, in our integrated supply chain. Our process not only within our plants, but our process within our business processes and how we can improve those, as well as how our process to get things in our distribution channel. And planning. We really try to plan. We really try. And we lean into how we can get better with different processes, going from SIOP to integrated business planning and things of that nature. Now I'm going to talk about what we're here to talk about, the integrated supply chain. This is a graphical depiction of the way my team and I think of how we get products to market. If we look at plan, source, make, and deliver, I oftentimes liken it to cooking. I plan a meal, I buy the ingredients, I make it for somebody, and I deliver it to the person who's sitting here eating. Now, this is our reality. Everybody wants lasagna, but I have no ricotta cheese. I have only noodles and pasta. That's all I can get because the supply of ricotta cheese is constrained. So that's the way I look at what we can source, right? We have the sourcing piece, and then what we can make. And then if we have a real reality, I thought we were making dinner for 10. We're making dinner for 75. But I could only get enough to make dinner for 15, so we have about 60 unhappy customers. So that's really the supply chain as we see it and the things that we're dealing with simplified. And so as you try to have it in these simple terms, this is the way I can explain it to the non-informed person who just wants what's coming out the door to the customer. So as you look over that continuum in our planning sector, we have our SIOP piece, we have manufacturing engineering, we have quality. In our sourcing piece, which I have my sourcing person here, now we have sourcing, which is embodied of our sourcing professionals. In the make piece, which is our manufacturing plants, we have materials management, we have and the production supervisors and things of that sort, and the mass production schedulers, which are in the materials management piece. And then in delivery, we have logistics, which is composed of our logistics professionals. And eventually we'll go towards that piece being our finished goods planner to try to pull that demand through and also try to understand what we need on a day-to-day basis so we are not having that variability that you talked about within where? Our manufacturing plant. You know, I looked at integrated supply chain as, and I know we have different ways how we progress it, but traditional ops was a versus even with supply chain. And that to me seemed counter because it was all these verses happening within the organizations. BU versus ops versus supply chain versus BU sometimes. NPI supply chain versus BU. But then if you look at this model, it gets us back to saying, how can we be one? How can we plan with the BU to understand what we need to build? And how can we put the plants as the center of the supply chain? Because until my men and women add value to those components, it's no money. It's no revenue. It's no earnings per share. It's no satisfied customer. It's no company. So you should want to understand within that center, that make piece, what's going on. Because it's a bazillion things that can happen within those four walls. It's an ecosystem that you're trying to see if you have the right people in the right place. Are they trained? Do they have materials there? Are they the right materials? Do they build it correctly? Is the material flowing properly? All these different things you're trying to do to make sure you do one thing and one thing only. Build a great part to go to a customer so your company can realize the revenue and feed the employees so they can feed their families. If you look at the vision and purpose, what we did with our team, and I say we because Ed's here supporting, is we wanted to paint not only to the team, but to the organization what we wanted to be. Our vision for the integrated supply chain at the Toro Company is to be a competitive advantage. Right now, how many people at their company has backlog? Millions upon billions upon. Now, if we could build that backlog, we would change the trajectory of our company, right? Isn't that a competitive advantage? But I dare say, supply chain has always been a competitive advantage. Remember, I said it's a thankless job. We don't get thanked. We get blamed. We never get thanked. But we've always been a competitive advantage. I just wanted to be very confident to signal to the organization, the Toro Company, that that's what we're going to be, a competitive advantage. If you look at what we painted for the future, industry-leading safety, getting less than 0.5 TRIR, a global network that runs as one cohesive unit, optimized capacity utilization, meaning every piece of the floor space is utilized, steady margin improvement. Laura, I heard you talk about margin just a moment ago. It is important, and if I had to give any words of wisdom or seeds, go learn how to read a P&L. Who runs the biggest business unit? Supply chain. We got all to spend. What if we yielded 3 to 5% flat volume productivity? That's a lot of money. We deliver to the bottom line. And when you think in those terms of how can I drive that productivity day in and day out, if you're a $20 billion company and you say, well, I got most of the spend, if you're a 30% margin company, that's probably about $10 billion you got in spend. Drive 3% off that $10 billion. You adding that right to the bottom line of the company. You have the biggest business unit. You have a huge impact on steady margin improvement, but you have to change the way you think about it, right? Your job is to drive productivity with the levers that you pull within the integrated supply chain. Factory of the future, really, that manufacturing engineer in me always looks at how can I have visibility. Best definition I've ever heard for optimization, and I'm going to say it's mine since I said it. We all take things over life and claim them as our own. Is you act on what you see. That's factory of the future. That's really that end-to-end look. Remember, if we looked at a network and at every node, we had certain metrics that can drive action to mitigate the results that we live with, versus which are WIP, too much finished goods inventory, the wrong thing, people not working in the right place, wrong material order, which goes into your WIP. If we had at every node from the beginning to the end, at every input and output, all the analytics that we needed to drive good action. You act on that immediately on what you see, and that's optimization. That's what I think about when I think of factory of the future. I think of the total, and maybe we should change the term. Well, we already have it, which is supply chain of the future, but we need to add that in and couple that into it's not just automation. It's seeing the analytics to drive action, to mitigate the things that could happen on the back end. Efficient logistics network and a say-do ratio. We've hurt there for the last 3 years. And she showed a picture of me when I didn't have as much gray. And that was maybe 4 years ago before all this stuff happened. But we haven't been able to do exactly what we say. I submit unto everyone in this room who works in a supply chain organization, just tell them what it is and let them deal with the consequences. Good news is great, but bad news that's told immediately is better because it doesn't age well. And then we can plan for it versus taking the pressures to say anything. And that's kind of a cultural shift also that we all have to try to lean into. Driving forces are people. I talked about our people, and you know, it's tough when you have all these folks that went in to work over these last 3 years. They didn't have an option to work from home. Every good and service that you've had has been supplied by folks who had to be on the phone, who didn't get to ride their Peloton as much, who had to go into the manufacturing plants, the 15-hour calls on the phone for our sourcing professionals, the planners that are there, the engineers that's in the plants, the quality folks that's in the plants. They didn't have that option. Right. We have Clorox out here. Thank you for keeping our employees safe in the plants. Because if that wouldn't have happened, we wouldn't have had any products. It would have been chaos, the world of chaos. I saw when we first started the pandemic, it was a grocery store folks there. Imagine if we wouldn't have figured it out for them. Imagine if we wouldn't have figured it out for our folks in the plants. When I was at Carrier at the time, we wouldn't have any air conditioners. In what? People say air conditioner luxury. Well, not in the retirement community, not in the hospital. It's a necessity. So those are the things that we have to lean into. That's why I named it first. You know, I gave the culture piece is imperative for us to lean into. The really connection with those folks, with what happens to the bottom line is really important. And I think that may be the ingredient that a lot of us take for granted. But if we keep taking it for granted, we're going to keep having a constrained environment. We have to let them know that you make up our capacity. We took that for granted until they no longer came to work. And we're still digging ourselves out of that constrained capacity based on the people that weren't there. Profitable growth piece, we talk about some things, supply continuity, factory of the future sustainability. But the profitable growth really comes down to how can we plan over that continuum, plan, source, make, and deliver to really give more product out. Remember I talked about throughput. Throughput, I need it out of our source, which is our supply continuity. I need it out of our factories. I need it out of our delivery networks, which is logistics. All the three that I named are constrained, and they're overspent from a cost standpoint, right? 10x in logistics, which is coming down. Our sourcing, everybody who's at one-time charges that you don't even know why, right? And then you talk to your business units, they're like, well, this inflation thing is not real. You're like, well, I just paid a bunch of one-time charges. You're telling me it ain't real. Well, I'm losing share. You guys had this kind of, I'm losing share. Your competitors. I said, well, tell me what they're doing to get steel. Because I can't get steel. I can't get engines. I can't get this. I can't get that. And then you look at it and you read the Wall Street Journal and you have a community of people like out here, which is this more of a therapy session than anything else. You have people like mine say, well, I'm not alone. And I think that's the important piece. We're not alone. We all sit in there and say, dude, did you go to the store or you've gotten so rich that you don't even recognize the inflation that's in everything that you bought? But it's because it's there. But how we manage that is how we can make our companies profitable. Productivity. And this is something that is very dear to my heart. Being raised in a plant, started at General Motors, right? This was the so what. The so what behind, did you earn your money it was an operations professional, now it's an integrated supply chain professional or supply chain professional. Can you deliver 3 to 5% productivity? In the levers of indirect sourcing, direct sourcing, logistics, and the plants. If you can do that, you're returning to the bottom line. You're improving the margin of the company. It's the so what. Now, in the last 3 years, we just don't want to lose as much money because we're upside down. But as we trend back, we have to plan for today, for what we're going to experience tomorrow. And that's what we talk about this all the time, about how we have to set the strategy. You talked about strategy. We have to plan for how we're going to take that headwind of not being productive and turn it into a tailwind and kind of ride that with the different processes we may put in place. So please lean into talking in terms of productivity. In summary, it talks at the bottom, best people, data analytics, modern workplace. Over the continuum, it gives different ingredients over the plan, source, make, and deliver continuum. And it's important for all the different things that we are charged to do for us to be visionaries. We have to paint that picture. You know, whenever you talk about anything that's not today, it's a vision. The best thing we could do as supply chain leaders is articulate that. Not in word, not in one statement, but in ingredients. What's included in that vision that makes it different from the day? How can you quantify that? Why should we change? What's the platform for change? How's this going to benefit me? Give the so what behind it. What value is it adding? You know, I know we are in the muck and mire of being tactical, but with strategy goes with tactics. Strategy and tactics, they go with vision, right? We first have visioning exercises. We first do a strategy, which is a fancy word for a plan. Then our tactics is execution. We're all great executors. But in order for us to really see that castle on the hill, that supply chain of 2030, we have to be visionaries just for a moment. Ideate with your teams. Last but not least, I think I got 6 minutes. Last but not least, I want to just give a EHS moment. This weekend, I saw the person from Bed Bath & Beyond. that committed suicide. We have hard jobs. They're complex, and we're the scorers of the company, and we're not winning. And it's tough because we spend hours and hours, and this never happened in any of our careers, but we've never in our careers managed crisis. We've never done that. And when you don't, and you're not used to winning, when you're used to winning and not winning for so long, and you're giving everything and you're not thanked for it, it's tough on you. We all have those moments, more than not, more in our career than we ever had. And my safety moment is you're not alone. 80% of all companies have integrated supply chain in it. You're not by yourself. So if anything, you have a form of people that care and understand you that you can talk to. Our jobs are hard. We have the most complex jobs in the company. I've worked in design. I worked in a P&L. And the most complex job is in the integrated supply chain. It's difficult, but it's also thankless. Not thankless, thankless. It's a thankless job. But remember, we touch every dime that a company realizes as revenue. Thank you so much.
I want to ask you some questions.
Oh, okay.
Wow, what a great communicator. One of the things about leadership is the ability to communicate, and I think we've seen a great example. Now, my research says that in the normal company, good news travels fast and bad news travels really slowly. 5-6 months, right? How have you turned that around? How have you embraced telling people the ugly early?
Practice, because it's not comfortable initially, but we practiced it. Look, we walked into offices and said we're not going to make our numbers. We walked into offices and saying when steel went up, we had to go in and say we need more money or we're going to be upside down if we don't plan for this in the next coming months. And then after you get comfortable with doing that, you look at it as not bad news or good news. The engineer kicks in. You look at it as data. It's a data point to make a decision. I'd rather have, and this is just because I'm quirky, I'd rather have more bad news than good. I'll listen to 90 things that are great. Oh, that's good. Give me the 2 things that are bad so I can really plan for it because it'll destroy these 90 things that are great. So I just say lean into looking at it as a data point.
Lean into it as data versus being defensive.
Correct.
Okay, great. Now, you talked about the mental health of supply chain employees, which I think is a really important topic because most supply chain employees that are watching this virtual feed have worked really hard and feel like, when is it ever going to stop? We've been through 32 months of disruption after disruption after disruption, and probably people don't say thanks. How do you say thanks to your employees?
Every quarter I do a video. And I do a video, and I start with thank you. I start every meeting with thank you. I visit plants all the time. My plants in DCs. I shake every hand, and I start with thank you. It's not easy for everybody, but if you're just mindful of thanking people that are normally never thanked for anything, it becomes your habit. And I'm Southern, so I naturally was raised to say thank you. So it's kind of a muscle that I've always
your DNA,
had.
Right?
But I'm saying if you lean into saying every quarter, I'm making sure that I have an address to my employees that is broadcast out to every plant, every site, every employee that I have in their emails. And the ones that don't have it in their emails in the plants, they have their stand downs where it's on the screens where everyone sees me at least once a quarter say thank you to everybody.
My research says that the supply chain employees do not feel loved. And every Valentine's Day, I run a blog, have you given your demand planner some love today? Yeah. And they don't get a lot of love, right?
No, not at
And
all.
so, I love the concept of making sure that we say thanks. I also want to point out that you talk about plan, source, make, and deliver together. And I think this is an important piece of why you won. Because the companies that have driven the best results in margin are managing source, make, deliver together. And only 55% of companies actually work that together. And so congratulations on your win. And I hope you can stay a little bit. I know you're going to be here at break if people have questions.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we're going to say thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
You were great.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're a great speaker. Thank you.